Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So today I wanted to have a real quick discussion on how to comment code in Matlab and Simulink. And I know what you're probably thinking, that this is a really simple discussion, but surprisingly there's a couple of nuances here that you might not know of, and hopefully we're all going to learn something here. So with that being said, let's just jump into it. So here I've got pretty much the real simplest MATLAB code that you can have. I just have clear, CLC, close all, and let's just start off on how to add a comment. So it's really simple. It's just the percent symbol. So notice here that this is green. So this is a simple comment, right? So you can have a comment by simply just adding the percent symbol followed by whatever you want to comment. Now, let's talk about where this gets a little bit more interesting. Note that you can have a very long comment that runs across multiple lines. And I'm going to actually stop right here, because if you notice that usually by default in your text editor there's this vertical kind of gray line. And notice here as I keep typing, and as soon as I hit this line, if I type one more character here, and now it's going to wrap around automatically to the next line. So if I keep typing, this wraps to the next line. Right, so you can have this large block of code, and MATLAB will automatically wrap it for you. So along those lines, one thing that's actually kind of interesting is, let's say you had a really long line. In fact, here I've actually typed this up in Word. I've got a really long comment that, in fact, instead of watching me type this in, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this from Word, and I'm just going to go ahead, put a percent sign for a comment. Let's go ahead and paste this in. Okay, now notice here that this line, because I pasted it in from another location, it has gone way past the marker, right? So there's a couple of things that we can do here. One thing that you can do is, if you keep your text over here, your cursor on the end of the line, and again, if you just start typing, so I'm going to go ahead and hit space bar, and notice that MATLAB automatically wrapped one line to this, right? And now it's still going over, so if I type another character, it wraps again. So you saw that you can do this by, you can have this multi-wrapping by just simply continuing to type off the end of the line. Here's one other way that you might be able to do that, and to be honest, I don't use it a ton, but let's do the exact same thing we did earlier. Let's come back over here, and I'm going to copy this line from Word. Go ahead and again assume that you've got a really long line of text here that theoretically we saw should be wrapped across 3 lines. So you could either do the technique we did earlier, where you place your cursor at the end of the code and just start typing and watch MATLAB wrap with every successive character entry, or you can come here to this super duper long line. If you right click on it, you see there's this option here that is wrap comments, or Control J. If you select this, it will go ahead and wrap that entire block automatically for you across multiple lines. So again, this is a kind of an interesting edge case, or interesting way that you can go ahead and wrap comments across multiple lines. All right, and let me clean this up a little bit. And while we're staring at this, in fact, tell you what, let me delete one of these blocks, because I just need one of these for the next demonstration. Remember from Word, if you look at this in Word, notice Word did a little bit of spell checking, right? Word noticed and underlined in red that these that demonstrate and environment are spelled incorrectly. Notice over here in MATLAB that it did not do the spell checking, right? I have no idea that I spelled demonstrate wrong or environment wrong right here. This is actually a new feature in some of the newer versions of MATLAB. In fact, I'm running 2024A right now. I'm not entirely sure where they introduced this feature, but if you come up here to the View tab, you can now click on Spelling over here, and now check that out. Isn't this kind of cool? Now within your comment, MATLAB does actually underline for you and demonstrate and call out where you may have spelled some things wrong. So again, you can do just like you would do in Word. Right click on this, select Spelling, and then fix the spelling of some of these words. So I think this is a kind of a neat, fun feature, and again, it's pretty new in newer versions of MATLAB. Okay, let's see, what else can you do? Oh, you know what? You can go ahead and let's show how you can comment out elements in a multi-line definition. So for example, let's go ahead and paste in some code that I have prepared off screen so you don't have to watch me type this in. So here again, here's a multi-line definition of some data object. So in this case, it's a simple data array, and then down here I've got a cell array, right? So tell you what, let me take the semicolons off for now, and let me just go ahead and run this so you can see what the output is. And as you would expect, right, the data array, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. The cell array, it's just a 4-element list of animals apparently. differently? Well, you can go ahead and use comments very easily if you want to go ahead and comment out one of the entries in this data array. So for example, like let's say I don't want the element 2. I can just put a % there. And let's say I don't want the element sheep. Again, I can go ahead and put the % there, and it will go ahead and comment those out in the definition. Okay? So that's really easy. The other way that this is actually very interesting, if you read some of the MATLAB documentation on commenting, they actually suggest that when you have a multi-line definition, something like this, instead of using the %, another way you can use, or another operation you can use, is you can use 3 dots or a set of ellipses. So if I hit dot, dot, notice right now everything is still black, right? It hasn't turned green to denote it's a comment. But if I push period one more time, look at that. The 2 now becomes green. So this line here is commented out. So same thing down here. The equivalent is I can just say dot, dot, dot. Okay, and again, notice here that sheep turns green upon the 3rd entry or the 3rd period. And so again, if I run this, you get the exact same output. So really, ellipses are another way that you can comment out lines. Truth be told, that is actually not how I use ellipses. So let's take a quick little side note. I think a much better way and better usage of ellipses is for breaking a long line into multiple separate lines. And what I mean by a long line, I mean it's code. So for example, let's go ahead and write here, truthfully, I use ellipses to break a multi-line code / function calls into a single readable line. So what I mean by that is, let's go ahead and pick up another line of code. So for example, let me go ahead and grab some of this again off screen that I prepared. I'll just paste it in here so you don't have to watch me type this in. Let's just define some stuff. And now let's say I want to plot this. So here's my really long line of code. Okay, so I'm going to copy this again and I'm going to paste it off from off screen. So here's this really long line of code, right? So really at the heart, I'm plotting it, but then I'm doing all sorts of other things in this function call. It's really long. I'm changing it to plot using X's. I'm changing it to a fat line. I'm changing the color. I'm changing the name that's going to be displayed in the legend. And again, this it kind of illustrates the problem of line 34 here. It's super long. So in order to read the entire set of code or to see what line 34 is doing, I have to scroll all the way over and then I see, oh, look here. At the end, I'm finally changing the marker size to 13. So to understand the context of this entire line of code, it's not very easy to see this on one page. So typically what most people do, and me included, is I like to make sure all of the code is visible on one line of one page of the MATLAB editor, meaning I want all of my code to be on the left of this vertical gray line. So what that means is I want to move everything after, like maybe for example right here, and I want this to be on the next line of code. So one thing you could try is you could just try hitting enter here, but that actually is not going to work. Notice though, MATLAB actually was smart. MATLAB auto added these ellipses right here. So let me take these off because I just want to show you what the problem is, okay? You can't simply break one function call across 2 lines without using an ellipse because this is going to give us an error, right? It doesn't know what you're doing. Really what you should be doing is you use the ellipses right here, dot, dot, dot. What that means is then anything after the dots on this line is effectively a comment, and the code is continued on the next line. So what the ellipses allow you to do, right, is this allows this to operate correctly, right? And it generates the plot just like we expected, right? You get all these magenta X's with the appropriate dimensions. But really, truthfully, ellipses are much more useful for breaking multi-line function calls across multiple lines. So really, I never ever use it to just comment out code, but I absolutely use ellipses to go ahead and break multiple long function calls into multiple lines. So again, what you'll see here is when you do this and you say dot, 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 notice everything after the ellipses turns into a comment. And now what I should do is I should hit enter to move this down to the next line, okay, to make this a lot more readable. So again, all we're doing here is making sure all of your code is to the left of this vertical gray bar so that it's much more visible and easy to read. Okay, let's come back to this example of these arrays. So I'm actually just going to copy these, and let's go ahead and move down here. And I want to show that you can use comments after the definition to add comments to multi-element lines. Arrays is probably a better description. What I mean by that is, again, let's make this up. So let's go here, data array B and cell array B. And again, let's take away these ellipses, okay? So now we see that data array B and cell array B, let's go ahead and suppress those because I just want to look at B down here, okay? So now these are full arrays, right? You can go ahead, and we saw earlier that if you put the percent in front, that knocks out this entire line, right? This entire line is now ignored. But there are times where you might want to comment after it, right? So what does this 2 mean, right? This is the number of wheels on a bicycle, right? Maybe that's why I put this in here. Maybe I've got this data array as a bunch of this number of wheels, and I'm putting in a unicycle, a bicycle, a tricycle, a car, whatever, right? And then, for example, this tiger, maybe I want to remind myself this tiger, what I'm really talking about is this is a saber-toothed version or something like that, right? So you can absolutely add comments after you do the definition, right? And that does not affect the data definition, right? So you can see that the data array and the cell array, these are the same thing, but it might sometimes be nice to have comments here as you're defining these, all right? Okay, so let's see. What else can you do? How about go ahead and what if you want to comment large blocks of code? Okay, so let's go ahead and I will grab, again, let's get some code from off screen. I'll paste it in here so you don't have to watch this. So here, apparently what I'm doing is I'm making a figure, I'm making some plots, I got a subplot. Tell you what, let's go ahead and semicolon some of this other stuff so we don't see it printing to the screen. And instead, let's go ahead and run this code and you'll see what this thing is doing, right? Is this code is doing all sorts of stuff. It's plotting stuff, it's changing some of the line width, it's giving some X and Y labels, it's turning the grid on, etc., etc., etc. Let's say I don't want any of this fancy stuff down here. These 4 lines, this is extraneous and I want to get rid of it. Well, one option to do this is obviously you can go ahead and put a percent sign here, and then a percent sign here, and then a percent sign here, and then a percent sign here. And that is all fine and dandy, and that absolutely works, right? That does exactly like you would expect. It ignores these, it treats them as comments, and we're all fine. But you saw that's a little tedious because you're commenting out one line at a time. It would be much better if I could comment out an entire block all at once. So for example, down here, to do this, in order to comment it all out, just go ahead and select all of this, right? I'm just going to literally select them all, then right click on the selection, and then there's a comment or Control R. So if you just go ahead and Control R or hit this comment, notice here that it went ahead and it commented out the entire block. Okay, so we'll put a percent sign and a space in front of every line of code. So this is pretty handy because it allows you to comment out an entire block of code all at once, right? And similarly, the uncomment is just as easy. You can select this block of code that you want to comment or uncomment, right click on it, and then just hit uncomment or Control Shift R in this case, like that. So in earlier versions of MATLAB, it was also Control T, so that does also still work. So in this case, it is listed as Control Shift R, but for those of you who have used it in the past, if you select this entire thing and instead hit Control T, that also does the uncommenting. So that's kind of what I've grown up and gotten used to. So I use Control R to comment out an entire block, or Control T to uncomment. But I guess the newer versions of MATLAB, right, you can still use Control R to comment and then Control Shift R to uncomment. Just a couple of different ways to skin this cat. You know, while we're talking about commenting out entire blocks of code, let me show you another kind of esoteric way of commenting large sections of code that, to be honest, again, I don't use as much, but it is available if you're interested. So what you could do, if you want to comment out this entire block, is instead of doing what we just did, where you select these and then right-click and hit comment, you could also use sort of a C++ style of commenting where you basically start and you say percent and then open brace. Okay, so this starts an entire block of comments, and then when you want to end it, you just come here and you do sort of the opposite. You do percent and then close brace. So again, this is one of these things that, you know, I actually saw someone else use it and I was like, what in the world are you doing? I've never seen that, because I never ever use this, but this is available as an option. You can kind of see it commented out the entire block of code in between these two sections, and again, you get the behavior you would expect. What else can we do? Let me move this out of the way, and let's look at other ways that you can use this percent comment operator. So the other thing you can do is you can use percent or the comment symbol to create what MATLAB calls sections. So to do that, you actually say percent to start a comment. Then I'm going to hit percent again to have a double comment. And notice as soon as you hit this double percent, you get this vertical bar, and actually this turns bold and it gets a little bit darker than the rest. So what you're going to do now is I'm going to name this section. So I'm going to hit space to put a space in here, and then I'm going to say this is now section, I don't know, A. Let's just make this up. Okay, so what section A does is underneath this, you're allowed to create these sections, and all code can be, I'm going to put this in quotes. I'm going to say grouped, grouped by section. So what we mean by that is, let's go ahead and, I don't know, I'm going to copy some other code like this. Okay, so here's some code that I've got. Okay, here's a section, and all of these operations sort of go together, right? So here I'm defining just a random vector, but then I want to start up a figure and I want to draw a histogram of it and turn the grid on. All of these are all sort of similar operations, right? So during debugging or during execution, one thing that you could do is you could execute these lines one at a time, right? So what I mean by that is you could select this line, right? And you could say right click and say evaluate or hit F9, right? So this will go ahead and, okay, that executed that line. I've got my U vector. Okay, now let's come over here. Let's go ahead, right click on this line and execute it. That gets me a blank figure over here. So great, I can go ahead and now right click on this, evaluate that. Okay, did that actually, yep, here it made my histogram. And then finally, let's come over here, select all this, then right click, turn the grid on. Okay, sorry, I didn't have the figure selected, so that grid on X command did not know where to go. But now that I've selected the figure, it has on focus, so now I can go ahead and turn the grid on. There we go. Okay, there. Okay, that all worked, right? But you saw, again, that was super cumbersome because I had one line at a time, right? What this section is going to allow us to do is you can evaluate this entire section all at once. So to do this, it's actually really simple to execute an entire section. Just go and place your cursor pretty much anywhere inside this section, and then you can right click, and then you can go ahead and come down here to run section or control enter, or you want to come up here to the ribbon, and up here under the editor tab, there's the run section. And what that's going to do is it's going to execute every single command inside this section. So equivalently, let me go ahead and just clear everything just so I can prove to you that this is what it's doing. I'll close all of my existing figures that I have open on my other screen, and then let's go ahead and just run this section by itself, and there you go. It does the exact same thing, right? And you can now have multiple sections. So let me go ahead and say I want to start another section. So again, you could go do this percent space, or the other way that you can also do this is you can come up here in the editor ribbon, and we are looking for the section break right here. You hit section break, and there it does a percent, and here is another section. And again, you can have more code over here. I don't know, x equals 1, y equals 2, z is x plus y, right? Things like that. And you can run sections one at a time. In fact, a workflow that is actually sometimes kind of handy is instead of just running the section, you can run and advance. So what we mean by that is, again, let's go ahead and clear CLC, close all. Oops. Okay, so you can come here, click in this section, and now I'm going to hit run and advance. That's going to run the first section, and notice then that it moves the cursor or the selection to the next section. So again, it's very easy to go ahead and then click run and advance again, and then you get your other code executed. So again, this is very helpful. So two percent signs or two comment symbols plus a space goes ahead and defines a section. And again, notice here that the section title up here is a little bit more, it's written in bold, right? It's bold green, and then subsequent comments inside the section are just normal comments. As you can kind of see here, they're not bold, and they're just followed by a single percent sign. Okay, and I want to show you one last thing that has to do with comments. So remember when you ever come over to MATLAB and you ask for help on any function, like for example, help rand, in the command window, it prints out a really nice description and documentation of the function. Okay, and I know some people might be thinking, well, if I write my own functions, how can I make documentation like this? Well, it's actually surprisingly simple the way you do this. Let me go ahead and pull up, I've got a function over here, so this thing I call super calculator. Let me just go ahead and bring that over and move this out of the way, and you're going to see that what my super function that I made up does is it's really actually quite simple. What this thing does is it adds two numbers together, right? You can see here's my code, right? Here's my function definition, and then down here I've got code. I've got a whole bunch of comments all over the place. So what MATLAB actually does is that MATLAB is going to look for, when you have a user-defined function like this, it looks for the first block of comments that happen after that function header or that function prototype, and it's going to use that as the help documentation. So what I can do now is I can go ahead and let me clear the screen over here, and I'll say help super calculator, right? And what that does is you can see it basically prints out the function or the documentation, right? The things that I wrote. Obviously, it does some kind of interesting things, like notice here that, I usually like to put this all in caps because older versions of MATLAB usually printed the help documentation and the name of the function all in caps, but it does do some interesting things like makes it bold over here, makes it a little bit easier to read. But anyway, you can write your own documentation of your now functions by just including a giant block of text, or excuse me, a block of comments after your function header. So that is pretty darn handy. Okay, so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to show here in MATLAB. Let's jump over to Simulink and ask, is there similar functionality in Simulink? Okay, so to look at that, I've actually got a demo Simulink model here. Let me go and drag and open this up. And again, all of this code is available. Just check out the video description for a link to a GitHub page that should have all of this available for you, so you can play with it as well. Here's my Simulink model. It's pretty darn simple. It's a dynamic simulation effectively. So if I just go ahead and run this, what this is doing is it's simulating the position and velocity of a block. Let me bring this scope over. It showed up in another screen. So you can see the block moves around. It's got some velocity as it's oscillating around, etc. Right? So this is all great. This is working nicely. Let's say I want to do something like compute the kinetic energy associated with this block. So what that means is I have to take the velocity here, and I have to do our good old friend kinetic energy is 1/2 mv squared, right? So let's break this thing off. Let's go ahead and get a math operation. I'll just go ahead and stub this thing out. Let's go ahead, connect this, and change it to a squared operation. So here is coming out of this should be v squared, right? So this is v squared. So now I need a gain block to go ahead and multiply by 1/2 times m, right? So this is 1/2 times m. Okay, and let me go ahead and blow this thing up a little bit. And coming out of this should then be 1/2 mv squared, or it should be the kinetic energy of the block, right? So let's just say KE, kinetic energy. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab a scope and let's go ahead and see if that's going to calculate correctly. So here's my overall model. Let's go ahead and run this, and whoops, right now there's a problem. This happens to me all the time. I'm making a Simulink model, I add some functionality, and I've broken the model. I've done something wrong. Something is off. So it probably has something to do with the functionality I just added. So I can either delete all of this functionality to get back to where I was, or I can slowly, I would really like to comment out some of these sections. And in fact, you can see MATLAB's got this red telling me it thinks something is wrong with this block. Obviously, we understand what's going on, right? I didn't define the variable m, so it doesn't know how to evaluate this. But let's say I don't know that's what's going on. Let's just say I want to comment this block out. So you can do that. It's just like in MATLAB. I want to really put a percent sign over this entire block to comment it out. So if you simply just right click on a block or a subsystem, you can go ahead and select comment out or Control Shift X. We're going to talk about the other option in just a second, but if you hit comment out or Control Shift X, you do that and you get a percent sign. You can kind of see it drawn down here in the bottom left of this block. This block is now no longer going to be evaluated. So now I can run this and the models will still operate. So we still get position, velocity, and now if I look at the kinetic energy, this is a little bit interesting here because it is just going to be 0. And in fact, let me see if I can pull up all these scopes all at the same time. Okay. Notice here that the position and velocity, there are several solutions. There's several data points that just happen to be drawn as a nice smooth curve. But this kinetic energy, it has like a single point of 0, right? Because we commented this out, so anything downstream is a little bit suspect, right? One thing that you could maybe do is we could instead sometimes, again, this is not very often, but instead of commenting this out completely, what you could also alternatively do is maybe you could go ahead and disconnect this like this, and whoops, let me see if I can drag this around like this. The wiring is a little bit tricky. Oh no, I've gone ahead and messed it up. Let me just do this. Sorry, I'm hitting all these too many buttons. Let's go like this, right? I just want to bypass this block because I know that this thing was causing some kind of problem, so I'm just going to bypass it, right? So now if I run this again, okay, it seems to work fine. Again, let me get all these scopes up on the same page. Right? So now at least it's executing. Of course, sure, this is not kinetic energy any longer, but at least it's giving me a little bit more information, right? Because now we can see all of these data points are being propagated forward. We are squaring each of the velocities as this is operating. So this block is doing the right thing. So we're getting a little bit more information here. So sometimes you might want to, instead of just commenting this out, you can see what we did here is we manually sort of bypassed it or walked around the block, right? But you saw that was a little cumbersome because you saw me. I was disconnecting things. I was trying to deal with all these broken arrows. I was trying to rewire things. So it's a little bit clunky what I just did. So a better solution is, again, let's go back to this. Let's go back to the original configuration. Let me uncomment this just to demonstrate the error, right? So right now we're back to a broken state, right? This doesn't work. So now, instead of commenting out this block, I can now use the comment through option. So if I right click on this and say comment through, what that does is it knocks out this block, right? It's no longer executing this block, but it's now passing the input directly through to the output. So it's effectively doing the same thing that we just demonstrated, but instead of cumbersomely and clunkily trying to rewire around it, this is just going to pass the wire straight through. So in this case, right, we get that similar behavior that we had earlier, but it's a little bit cleaner. Again, this is, I'm not thrilled about this option. In fact, I very, very rarely ever use this comment through. I almost exclusively use commenting out the entire block because you saw what this is really doing is it's passing the inputs to the output through. So you're sort of changing the behavior of this block, right? This block is intended to transform the signal, but now using the comment through, you are by definition not transforming the signal. So it might allow the simulation to proceed, but you just got to be a little bit careful. I feel like this is maybe a little bit insidious, so I tend to steer away from this, and I usually just comment out the entire block, knock it out, do my analysis, fix the problem. In this case, the problem was it has no idea what M is, so let's make something up. Like, I don't know, let's say M is 5. Right, that's the mass, and now I can uncomment this, and now this whole thing will run correctly, right? So now we get the kinetic energy coming out. Okay, so that being said, I think that is probably a good spot to leave it. We went ahead and we looked at a fair bit of different ways to do commenting in MATLAB and what it does. So just to recap, we saw that basically it's a percent sign. Nothing fancy about that. Percent sign is just how to do a comment. We looked at how to wrap multiple lines of comments. We also showed how to wrap and comment out entire blocks of code. You either use this esoteric method here, or what I always like to do is I select a section and Control R to comment and Control T to uncomment. And then the other thing that I find very, very helpful is this concept of sections, right? Where you have the double percent sign followed by a space. That goes ahead and defines your section and allows you to execute blocks of code one at a time. And then lastly, what we just looked at was basically bringing that functionality over to Simulink, where same thing, you can comment out a block using Control-Shift-X, or right-clicking and going ahead and selecting comment out or uncomment. So that's pretty much it. I hope this was enjoyable. I hope you learned something new, and I hope I'll catch you at a future video. Talk to you later. Bye.